This video we are going to be seeing how we can create the habit streak here. So we are going to be creating the current streak, the longest streak, the total completed, completion rate, and the last completed date. So let's see how we can do this one by one. So before we start building this thing, we need to make sure that we have the basic databases that is required for this formula. So the first one is we need a habits database, and the second one is we need a habit logs database. First properties that is required for the formula to work is just this one property which is called habit logs, so which is connected to every completion that is done for that habit. And in the habit logs database, we need just this one property which is the date property and the relation property which connects the corresponding habit to it. So before we get into the formula and how to build the formula that we want to create, let's see what is the existing formula that we already have. So the first thing that we have to see is we have a list of dates and we have gaps, which is nothing but the number of days between the previous date, the current streak, longest streak, total completed, completion rate, and the last completed date. And after that, we are showing the text in the display formatted as text. That is how we get this text that's displayed here. So let's start building the formula one by one. So the first thing that we'll be doing is the current streak, and let's create a formula for current streak. Now, to find the current streak, we need the list of all the completions of the habits, so which we are having in the habit logs relation property. Next, we want to convert each of these list of pages into a list of dates. So if you see here in the debug mode, it is showing list of blocks, which is nothing but a list of pages. And for each of these pages, we want it to return a list of date. So we are going to be using the map function for that. So the map function is going to take the current value, which is a page, and return its date property. So we're going to use the dot notation, which accesses the properties of the page. So we're going to take the date property of that page, and we're going to return the date. So for each page in the habit logs, we are replacing the page with its date property. The next thing that we want to do here is we want to find what is the difference between the previous time it was completed on each of the day. To understand this, let's take an example. Let's assume a person is standing on February 1st and he wants to know what is the number of days since the last time he completed the habit. So he takes the difference between February 1st and January 29, which gives him a result of 3. We are including the February 1st also to count the number of days. And this is for February 1. Let's go to the previous day. So if the person is standing on January 29, the previous time he completed the habit is January 27th, and when he calculates the date, the difference between those two dates is going to get 2. And if he goes for the previous day, he need to calculate similarly. So we need to do this for each of the day. For each of the individual day, we're going to check when was the last time the habit was completed and finding the difference for that. So let's do that. Before we are going into the next one, let's assign a variable to this current list of dates that we're having, so that instead of writing the formula again, we can assign a variable to this and we can use the value in multiple places. So let's use the let's function that is there in the Notion formulas. Now let's define the next thing that we need, the date differences. Let's find that. So now we are going to take the dates value that we are having. Since we need to find what is the difference between the current date and the last time the habit was completed, it should be in ascending order so that we don't miss out any dates. So we are going to sort the entire dates list for that. So let's call the sort function here. And after we have sorted the dates list, we are going to use the map function here. And in the map function, as I explained, for each of the date in the list, we are going to find what is the difference between that date and the last time the habit was completed. We are going to use the date between value here. We need to find the days between the current date and the last time the habit was completed. We're going to use the at value. So we need to get the previous value in the list. Since we are using the map function here, the map function has an index variable which is going to give the index of the current date that is taking. So index -1 gives the previous date with respect to the current date it is taking. So now as you can see here, for each of the date, it is kind of finding what is the number of days. As we calculated in the example earlier, we found that the first difference is going to be 3 and the second one is going to be 2 and then 1. So that is what exactly it has been done here. So this is what we are doing for each of the date in the list of dates. But there are a few things that we need to do here. So the first thing is, if it is the first time the habit is completed, then we don't have any previous day that we need to find the difference between. So in that case, if the index is 0, which means it is the first entry for the habit, we have to return a 1 as the value instead of calculating the date. So we're going to use the if function for that. So inside the if function, we are going to check for one thing. The first thing is we need to check if the index is 0. So if the index is 0, just return 1. You don't have to do any calculations. And if it is not 0, we're going to calculate the thing that we already have calculated. So now here what I've done is we are checking if index is equal to 0, which means it is the first entry in the list, the first time the habit is completed. And we are going to return 1 because there is no previous time the habit was completed. We don't have to calculate the number of days. And for any other date in the list, we are going to calculate what is the difference between the previous time the habit was completed in days. So let's call this value that we have calculated date differences. Now we have a list of numbers and it is showing the differences between each of the consecutive days. So if the number is equal to 1, we have completed the habit in exactly 1 day, which means that the completion is consecutive and we don't have any days in between those two completions. If the number is not equal to 1, which means there is more number of days between the two completions, which means it is not consecutive, then that is the end of the current streak and it starts a new streak. So we are going to split this entire list into smaller list at every place where the number is not equal to 1, and this gives a smaller list of individual streaks. You are going to use this streak list to find the current streak and the longest streak. So let's see how we can create this streak list. Since in Notion formulas we don't have a direct way to split the entire list into smaller sublists based on some criteria, we have to use a workaround for that. So we are going to first add commas at the place where the number is not equal to 1, and then we are going to use the join function so that we get a single string of all of these numbers, and we're going to use the split function to get the individual streaks. The first thing that we have to do here is we have to take the date differences list. We are going to go through every value in the list, and if the value is not equal to 1, we are going to add a comma in front of that value so that we can use that comma to split the list from there. So let's use the map function for that, and we need to check a criteria, so we are going to use the if function here. So what we have done here is we are checking if the current value is not equal to 1, and if it is true, which means a new streak is starting, we are ending the previous streak with a comma so that later we can use this comma to create a sublist. And currently if you see the result, so if you are in the debug mode, you can see that at every number where the number is not equal to 1, we are getting a comma in front of that number. And you can see that these are no longer numbers, these are formatted as text. As you can see here, it is showing text because we are using the format formula here, which means it formats the number into text. So now we have a list of text. So now the next thing that we have to do here is we have to use the join function so that we get a single string of the text. Now here, as you can see, it is showing a text value, a single string with these numbers. So every value separated by the comma is a streak, and these numbers does not by itself mean anything. It's just a placeholder for a single day. So if there are more numbers, which means there are more days. So the number of days in this individual streaks is just the count of the number that is there. So in the first one we have a single day, the second streak we are having 2 days, and the third streak we have 1 day, and so on. So now what you have to do here is we have to split this text using the delimiter as the comma so that we get individual streaks as a list. So let's do that. So we are going to be using the split function here. So now as you can see here, we have a list of individual text that is separated by commas. So if you turn off the debug mode, we have a list of text, and each of these individual characters represent a day. So if there is more than one character, it is a day. These are more like tally marks for each of the streak. So for better understanding, what we can do here is instead of giving the current value and formatted as text, we can use a single tally mark, this symbol here. So now as you can see, for each of the day we are adding a tally mark here. So this is a list of streaks. So if you look at the list here, so for the first day we have 1 day. So for the second streak we have 2 days, third streak, fourth streak, and so on. These are the number of days in each of these streaks. Now we have a list of streaks. So let's call this list streaks. Now we have a list of streaks. The next thing that you have to do here is let's start calculating the current streak and the longest streak. So first let's calculate the current streak. So the current streak is nothing but the latest streak in the list of streaks. As we have already sorted the list, the streaks are in ascending order, which means first streak that has been created is in the first of the list and the latest streak is at the end of the list. So we have to get the current streak, which is nothing but the last streak in the list. So we are going to be using the at function to get the current streak. So as you can see, we have used the add function to get the last value in the list. So -1 is nothing but the last value in the list. So now we have the streak that is in the at the end of the list. So this is going to be our current streak, and the current streak is now is only a tally mark. We need to find the length of this current streak. So we will be having a tally mark for each of the day in the string. So we have to find the length of the current streak. So for that we are going to use the length function, which returns the length of the string. So now as you can see, it is returning the current streak, so which is going to be 1. But before we try to use this value as the current streak, we have to check for two things. So the first thing is, if the habit is not completed today or yesterday, we have to return the current streak as 0. So first we need to check the latest entry of the habit. So we need to check whether it is falling on today or yesterday. So let's just do that. So we are going to be using the if function, find that. So let's do that. So since we have the dates value here, so we can use this dates variable here to check whether the last completion date is today or yesterday. So we're going to sort the dates in ascending order and then get the last date in the completions. So here what we're checking is we need to check for two conditions. So first thing is we need to check whether the last time the habit was completed is not today or it is not yesterday. The current streak is 0. Now let's call this value the current streak. So here we need to actually use the AND function here. So we need to check if both of the conditions are true and not just any one of them. So if both the date is not today and not the previous day, that is yesterday, if it is not any of these days, then we have to return 0. So this is going to be an AND function. So this is how you calculate the current streak value. Let's check if the current streak is working. So as you can see here, we have three habits, habit 1, 2, and 3. And for each of the habit, the last completion is, for habit 1, it is the 6th, that is yesterday. For habit 2, it is 30th, and habit 3, it is 30th. And since habit 1 is completed yesterday, it needs to show a streak of 1 for habit 1 and 0 for the other two habits. And that is what it is showing here. Now let's try completing one of these habits and let's see if the current streak is updating as required. So if we complete the habit 1 for today, then it should increase the streak by 2. And as you can see, it is working as expected. So let's check if it is working for habit 2. So if we complete for today, it is showing a streak of 1. So that is how you create the current streak formula. Now let's see how we can calculate the longest streak. So let's first create a property for that. To calculate the longest streak, it is kind of similar to the current streak as how we calculated. So we would require the dates variable, the date differences, and the streaks list so that we can calculate the longest streak. So let's create the basic variables first. We can use the same variables as how we created for the current streak, and we can use that for the longest streak also. So we can just copy this formula here, and we can paste that in the longest streak. And instead of the current streak, we'll be creating a formula for the longest streak. To calculate the longest streak, we are going to be using the streaks list we calculated earlier. So in this streak list, we are going to convert each of these individual streaks into the number of days in each of these streaks, and we are going to get the maximum value in the list of numbers, which is going to give us the longest streak. So let's calculate that. So we are going to be using the map function to convert each of the tally marks string into the number of days in that streak. By using the current.length function here, for each of the streaks in the streaks list, we are taking that string and we are returning the length of that streak string, which is nothing but the number of tally marks in that streak. So which gives us the number of days in that streak. So next thing that we have to do is we have to find the maximum value in this list. So we can do that by using the max function, and let's do that. So this value gives us the longest streak, and that is how you calculate the longest streak. Let's call this value the longest streak. So now let's check if the longest streak is working as required. So now as you can see, the longest streak that we are currently having for habit 1 is 2, for habit 2 it's 1, and for habit 3 it's again 1. So let's complete the habit 1 for more number of days and let's see if longest streak is working as required. So we can change these dates to create a longer streak. So now as you can see, we have completed the habit 1 on 3 consecutive days, that is 5th, 6th and 7th, and you can see the current streak that is being shown is 3 and the longest streak is also 3. So the longest streak is working as required. So that is how you calculate the longest streak. Now let's get into calculating the total completed, completion rate and the last completed date in a single formula. So let's create a formula to calculate these values. So to calculate these, we would require the dates value as we calculated in the previous formulas. So let's calculate that first. Now we have a list of dates on when the habit was completed. Now let's call this the dates variable. First thing that you're going to be calculating is total completed in the last 30 days. To calculate this value, we're going to take the list of dates and then we're going to filter this list of dates to include only the dates if the date is within the last 30 days, and we are going to find the total length of this filtered list so that we get the number of times the habit was completed in the last 30 days. We are going to be doing that using the filter function. Let's see how we can do that. So here we have created a criteria for each of the dates. We are checking whether the current date is greater than today minus the last 30 days. So if the current date is within the last 30 days, it returns the value. Otherwise, it does not include that value. So now we are having the list of dates which is in the last 30 days. And now we have to find the length of this list, which is going to give us the number of times the habit was completed in the last 30 days. So this is how you calculate the total completed in the last 30 days. Now let's call this value total completed. Now let's see if this value is working as required. So as you can see, for habit 1, we are having a total of 7 entries here. So from today, the last 30 days is on or after the 7th of January. So all of these fall after 7th of January. So it's going to be included in the completion date. So if we complete the date, like any date that is on or before the 7th of January, so let's say the 5th of January, it's not going to be included in the total completed in the last 30 days. So as you can see, it is not being included in the total count for completion in the last 30 days. So now let's check if it's correct for the other habits. For habit 2 and 3, there are a total of 4 entries for habit 2 and 5 entries for habit 3. And here you can see it is showing the total completed as 4 and 5 for habit 2 and 3. So the total completed is working as required. So let's get into the next value that you have to calculate, which is going to be the completion rate. To calculate the completion rate, we are going to be finding the total number of times the habit was completed in the last 30 days and divide that by 30 to get the percentage of how much the habit was completed in the last 30 days. So let's use the let's function for that so that we can declare variables that can be used to calculate the completion rate. The formula for calculating the completion rate is going to be total completed and the total number of values. Now for completed, we are going to be taking the count of how many times the habit was completed in the last 30 days. So since we've already calculated that in the earlier value, we're going to be using that same value here. The next thing that we want to calculate is the total. So total is going to be 30 and the completion rate in the last 30 days is going to be completed by total. So let's get these numbers in percentage. So that gives us a completion rate. But there is one thing that is to be done here. So if the first time the habit was completed is only in the last 30 days, then we need to only take that number of days for the total, and we should not be taking the entire 30 as the total. So we need to check if the first time the habit was completed is in the last 30 days, and if it is in the last 30 days, then we have to only take the number of days from that first day until today and not take the full 30 days. So to check that and find the total value, let's use the if function for that. So if the condition is true that the first time the habit is completed falls in the last 30 days, then we have to return the total as the number of days from that first day the habit was completed and today, which is going to be a number that is less than 30. Or if it is greater than 30 days, then we have to only take 30. So that is how you calculate the completion rate. Now let's call this value the completion rate. Let's see if this completion rate is working as required. As you can see, for habit 1, we are getting a completion rate of 20%. For habit 2, it's 33%. And for habit 3, it is 38%. So for habit 1, since the first time the habit is completed is not within the first 30 days, it is going to take the number of completions, that is 6, divided by the entire 30, which is going to give you 20%. And for habit 2, since the first time the habit 2 is completed is within the last 30 days, it is January 26, it is going to take the total as today minus 26, which is going to give you somewhere around 11 or 12 days. And total total number of completions within that is 4. So 4 by 12 is going to give you 33%, and that is what is shown for habit 2. And similarly for habit 3, it is showing 38%. Since habit 3 is also only started in the last 30 days, the total is going to be the number of days between 25th January and today, and the total time it is completed is 5. So it's going to give somewhere around 5 by 13, which is going to give you 38%. So that is how you calculate the completion rate. Now let's go into the next one. So the next thing that we will be calculating is the last completed date. So let's see how we can do that. The last completed date is the last time the habit was completed, and we are going to use the dates list that we have already calculated, and we'll be getting the last date from that list of dates, which is the last time the habit was completed. So let's do that. So as you can see here, we are taking the entire dates list and we're sorting that in ascending order, and we're getting the last value in that list, which is going to be the latest date on which the habit was completed and which is the required value for the last completed date. Let's call this value the last completed date. Now let's see if this value is working as required. Now, as you can see, for habit 1, it is showing as February 7th, which is a last completed date. For habit 2, it is the same 7th February, and for habit 3, it is January 30th. As you can see in the completion details, it is showing the last completed date as how it is for habit 1, 2, and 3. Now, that is how you calculate the last completed date. Now, we have calculated the values for each of these details that we require: current streak, longest streak, and the completion details, that is the total completed, completion rate, and the last completed date. Now, let's see how we can format this to display in the Notion formulas. So, first, let's start with the current streak. So before we start, we want to see how we want the text to be formatted. So for that, we can first look into the existing formula and see how we require formatting to be done. So in this formula, as you can see, the current streak is required to be shown like this. So there will be a current streak and then we'll be showing the number. So the longest streak, if the longest streak is the current streak, then we'll be showing the longest streak as blue background. Otherwise, if it is just the longest streak and there is no current streak, we'll be showing that in normal blue text. We'll be showing the current streak in green background. For example, if we complete that, we'll be getting a current streak as 1, and which is highlighted in green. That is how we are going to be formatting the current streak and longest streak. For the other completion details like total completed, completion rate, and the last completed date, we'll be showing that in plain blue text. And for the last completed date, if it is today, we'll be showing the text in green. So let's see how we can do this. Let's start with the current streak. So for the current streak, we need to display something like this one. So let's type in what we want to display. So this is our current streak text, and we want to style this using the style function so that we can show it in code and with some background. And we also want an emoji to be shown before the current streak, which is the fire emoji. So this is the current streak text that we want to show. So we also want to check for one more thing. So if the current streak is 0, we want to show as no current streak. So let's do that. So we are going to be using the if function for that. So now here, if the current streak is equal to 0, so if the current streak is 0, we want to show it as no current streak with the styling of code and gray. And if the current streak is not 0, we want to style it as code in bold and green and then green background. So that is how you can format the text to show the current streak. Now let's get into the next one, which is the longest streak. So let's do that. So this is how we want to show the longest streak, which is code bold and in blue text. We also want to check for one more thing, that if the longest streak is the current streak, then we want to also highlight the longest streak in blue background. So let's do that. So we are going to be using the if function for that. So before we can use the if function, we have to calculate the current streak in the longest streak formula so that we can get what is the current streak value. Let's bring the formula from the current streak property and add that in this property also so that we can get the current streak value in this property. So let's copy this current streak value here and add another variable in the longest streak so that we can get the current streak value in this property also. Now as you can see, we also have the current streak value in this property, so we can use the current streak as required in the function. So as you can see, we are checking if the longest streak is equal to the current streak, and if it is equal, we are also adding a blue background to the text that is shown. Otherwise, we are only returning the blue text for the longest streak. This is how we can display the longest streak. So as you can see here, the longest streak is equal to the current streak. So all of the longest streak is highlighted in blue background. So that is how you can format the longest streak text. Now let's get into the completion details. So here, as you know, we want each of these text to be shown in blue text. Here, since we are displaying more than one value in the same formula, we want to also separate them by an enter or a space so that we can see them in one line instead of in a straight line. So let's see how we can do that. Now, as you can see, we have typed the text that we want to be displayed for each of these values. Now, we want to style each of these text to be shown. But before we kind of want to do that, instead of typing the style function for each one of these texts individually, we can use a list and we can use the map function to style each one of the text in that list. So for that, we have to create a list. So we can wrap this text inside a list so that we can use the map function for each of this individual text and use the style function inside the map function. So let's put this text inside a list. So as you can see now, we have a list of the text that we want to be displayed. Now let's use the map function and the style function inside it so that we can display the text as how it is required. Now, as you can see, we have formatted each of the text that is inside this list. So we have used the map function, and inside the map function, the current keyword gives us the current string that we want to style. And we are using this common style function for each of these texts that we want to be displayed. The next thing that we want to do here is we want to display each of these texts. So we are going to be doing that using the join function, which joins each of the text in this list. And the delimiter can be an enter so that we see an enter between each of these texts that is displayed. So we have used the join function to display the text, and let's see how it works. So now as you can see, it is showing the completion details, the total completed completion rate and the last completed date. So we need to do some more tweaks so that it looks much more better when it is displayed. So let's do that. So the first thing is we can add a percentage symbol after the completion rate so that it is much more better. And after that, we can also use the format date function to format the last completed date. Now, as you can see, it is showing a date format for the last completed date in this format that is given here. So as you can see now it is displaying the details as required. There is one more thing that we have to be doing. So if the last completed date is today, then we want to show that in green. So let's see how we can do that. So inside this map function, we can use an if statement to check if the index is the last item in this list, that is the last completed date. So if it is the last completed date, we also want to check for a condition. And if that is true, then we can do some additional styling for that text. So what we have done here is if the index is 2, that is the current value to format is the last completed date text. We want to check whether the last completed date is today or not. So if it is today, we want to style that current text in green. Otherwise, we want to style the text in blue. So let's see how the text is displayed in the formula. So as you can see now, since the last completed date is today, it is formatted in green. So if we change the date to 3rd, then as you can see, it is showing the last completed date as 6th, which is not formatted in green because it is not today. So if it is completed today, it will be formatted in green. So that is how you can format the values to be displayed in the formula, and that is how you create the current streak, longest streak, total completed, completion rate, and the last completed date in Notion formulas. Hope you found this video helpful. Thank you for watching.